Across Wales and northern England by this stage. Northern Ireland, Scotland seeing a mix of sunny spells and showers, and it's a cold start to the day in these areas, with temperatures in some places down in the low single figures. The cold air because of northerly winds, and those northerlies extend countrywide through the morning, helping to push away the last of the rain and bringing brighter skies for many and drier weather finally across much of the country. Having said that, there will be further showers, these not as heavy or as prolonged as recent weather, but certainly a mixed afternoon to come. Sunny spells and showers and a cold wind with highs of just 15 Celsius in the south, 10 in the north. Now, Saturday starts off chilly, a touch of frost in places. Bright, though, across the south and the east, and we keep decent spells of sunshine into the afternoon. Western and northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England and Wales will see further showers. And by Sunday, after a dry start, unfortunately, we've got more wet and windy weather arriving from the west and the southwest.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Residual delays remain heading south down the M6 through Lancashire from junction 31 to 30 towards the M69 near Preston after a collision that's now been cleared. Queues nearly back to the M55. Really slow out of London on the M1 after earlier flooding at junction 6, the North Watford exit. And the Kent stretch of the M25, well, right on the Kent-Surrey border. The motorway is shut clockwise from the M26 to junction 6 at Godstone for accident investigation work. It also means that the M26 is closed London-bound heading up to the M25 with long anti-clockwise queues through the Surrey stretch of about an hour from well before the M23 towards 6 at Godstone, partly due to the roadworks, and there are delays of an hour on arrivals and departures to and from both Gatwick and Heathrow Airport because of the adverse weather conditions. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Desning Crack.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good evening to you. It's Thursday, the 26th of September. I'm Martin Daubney, covering for Nigel Farage, standing in for the big man. Now, put down your cup of tea and brace yourselves, because have we got a story for you. The House of Lords has warned the public that citizens must be ready to fight in war for their country. And this is not April Fool's. This comes as a new report says the British Army is too small to go up against prolonged warfare. So get ready. It could be you at the ladder next. And just 24 hours ago, we learnt about the news that 37 domestic abusers were wrongly released under Labour's scheme to tackle prison overcrowding. Well, later today, Labour are looking at rewarding prisoners for learning about reoffending by shortening their prison sentences. Can it work? Plus, police have warned that the safety of MPs is under severe threat. They've warned that the intensifying conflict in Lebanon could become a motivating factor for terror attacks and plots. Now, all of that to come, but first, here's your news headlines with Mark White.
Good evening. The latest headlines from the GB News Centre. The Prime Minister is due to address the United Nations this evening as he joins other world leaders in calling for an immediate ceasefire in the fighting between Israel and in Lebanon. Sir Keir's speech comes on the day the Israeli military targeted and killed another top Hezbollah commander. Mohammed Sarour, a senior leader in the terror group's aerial command, was killed in an airstrike on a building in southern Beirut. The US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin has warned the situation is rapidly escalating.
And we now face the risk of an all-out war. Another full-scale war could be devastating for both Israel and Lebanon. So let me be clear. Israel and Lebanon can choose a different path. Despite the sharp escalation in recent days, a diplomatic solution is still viable.
Scotland Yard has issued a call for any potential victims of Mohammed al-Fayed to come forward. 5 women have claimed they were raped by the former Harrods owner, who died last year at the age of 94. A number of others say they were sexually assaulted by him. The current managing director of Harrods, Michael Ward, has apologised and said the business failed colleagues. The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton have told a court they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are being sentenced this week. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty of killing 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. The Hollywood icon Dame Joan Collins has taken a swipe at extreme political correctness. Speaking to GB News presenter Andrew Pearce, she said she was definitely no fan of woke culture.
Consider myself to be feminine and a feminist, and why should we be called female actors? I find it demeaning. I think it's gone out of control. Really, you can't say anything, people get offended. We've lost our British sense of humour.
And finally, astronomers have unveiled the most detailed map ever seen of our galaxy. From the violent birth of newborn stars to the hidden mysteries of the galactic core, the new images show the Milky Way as you've never...
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Mark. Now, welcome to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man, Nigel Farage. Now, the UK is on the brink of a conflagration. We have regional conflict in the Middle East, a full-blown war in Eastern Europe, and now the government is being warned that British civilians must be ready to fight because we don't have a big enough army. You couldn't make it up. A new committee report from the House of Lords has said that the country must adopt the mindset of a nation under genuine threat. Lord Kitchener is no longer saying your country needs you, but the country is ordering you to fight for king and country. Well, joining me now to go through this is Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, defence analyst and former British Army officer. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, Lieutenant Crawford. Let's face it, this idea is absolutely bonkers. The notion that Lords, average age of about 300, can be ordering young men and women to go and fight for their country is absolutely preposterous. I know we've got the smallest army since the Napoleonic era, the smallest RAF since its inception at the end of World War I, so few Navy sailors that we are scrapping ships. But the notion that we can force British citizens to go to war is for the birds, isn't it?
Good evening, Martin. Well, yes, that's one way of looking at it. I would just say that from the outset, the people who send our young men and women to war are us, the electorate, and we do that through our elected representatives in Parliament. And the House of Lords has a peripheral role in that, an important one, you might think, but it's peripheral to that. It's down to the Prime Minister and the government and the Parliament to do that. Having said that, although I haven't read the House of Lords report in any great detail, I have read a lot of the media coverage of it, and I think it's pretty accurate, to be honest. We are in a position where our armed forces have atrophied to such an extent that we probably can't do, or they can't do, what we would want them to do. And the reason for that is decades of underfunding through successive governments of all political hues. And that's what Sir Keir Starmer and John Healey, his Defence Secretary, and his government have now got to tackle.
But the fact of the matter is, if people aren't volunteering, if the conscription process is so woeful, which we know it is, and by the way, they should probably think about stop having a go at white working-class men who historically have been the most likely to take up arms and defend their country. Look at Rishi Sunak's doomed national service scheme. That had a 65% approval rating against it from those aged 18 to 24. They're the ones who will be expected to go up the ladder first. Not some dusty old fossils in the Lords.
Well, that's what I think the populist or popular concept might be. But I am reminded that in the 1930s, the Oxford Union, the speaking union, passed a motion saying that this House would not fight for king and country. And a few years later, they were either all dead or in prisoner of war camps. So I think that it's easy to say such things in the abstract. But when bombs are being dropped in London or Liverpool or Glasgow or wherever, or missiles are crossing the Channel, or boats are being sunk in the North Sea and the North Atlantic, I think people have a completely different perspective. I have no doubt that today's younger generation, if it came to it, if push came to shove, would step up to the plate. And I'm confident that those are the sort of people that we have to rely on in the future.
Do you think that's really the case? I mean, I just came into the studio now, and outside there's a protest once again on the streets of London by pro-Palestinian protesters. Tens of thousands of them seem to turn up. I wonder if those people would take up arms against Britain. Do we really have enough people in the United Kingdom who believe in patriotic values, who believe in king and country, who believe in protecting our sovereign borders? The data suggests that's not the case. They can't get people to even volunteer to sign up at the moment. The recruitment is at a record all-time low.
Well, that's a fair point, and there are reasons for that. And I think the primary reason is that the armed forces are not seen, generally speaking, as being a sort of attractive career option at the moment. And the reasons for that are many and manifest. But much of it has to do with the negative PR, which appears in the media week in and week out. And much of it is actually deserved. The defence estates properties for married quarters and soldiers' quarters is poor, and it needs to be upgraded. The recruitment system, which in terms of the army has been outsourced, is appallingly poor, and that needs to be sorted. And I'm heartened that John Healey, our Defence Secretary, has said that he is going to impose immediate action to try and sort that out. And as for the people on the streets protesting about Palestine, well, most of them actually don't know what they're protesting about. It's almost become fashionable to do that. There is a debate to be had. There's much to be said on both sides. And there's much to be conceded on both sides. But I think that we should be reasonably optimistic that our youth in particular will rise to the top if needed.
Well, I admire your glass half full mentality. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much for your time. Now, to continue this conversation, I'm joined in my studio by my superstar panel. And tonight is the Conservative MP for Romford, Andrew Rosendale, and, of course, Peter Tatchell, the human rights campaigner and activist. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Andrew, could I start with you? Successive governments have grappled with the issue of how do we make young people sign up to take up arms or be prepared to defend the realm. Hasn't been achieved by successive governments. Your mob didn't do a good job. I don't think that the current lot will be much better. Is it really the answer for the laws to say, well, OK, you don't volunteer, we're going to force you to do it?
So, freedom isn't free. Our liberties are not something we can just take for granted. There are times in our history when we do have to fight to defend the freedom that we cherish. And my father was in the Royal Air Force in the Second World War. Both my grandfathers fought in the First World War. So they had to go and fight for king and country on both occasions. Who knows? That might happen again in the future. I hope it doesn't. I don't believe it will, but you can never be certain. One thing I will say is that this country is a great nation, and we do rise to a challenge if we are threatened, if our freedom and our way of life, our existence is under threat. The British people do rise to that. The big problem, I'm afraid, is that, as you've rightly said, Martin, every government has failed to invest in our defences. I believe that we should at least be spending 3%. And I do hope the new government we have at the moment will match that, because if we don't invest in our defences, we pay a very high price down the road.
I wonder, Peter Tatchell, back to my point about how many people actually believe enough now in Great Britain, the United Kingdom, in the monarchy, the realm, everything that the country stands for seems to be almost taken apart from within academia, from within a lot of the mainstream media, from, I think, a lot of within the political circle. Do we now find ourselves in a position where particularly people on the liberal left, people outside tonight, so I wouldn't call them liberal, but they're protesting against Britain on the streets of London? These people would never in a million years take up arms to defend the UK, would they?
Well, the people protesting for Palestine outside tonight, they're not against Britain. They're against Britain providing arms for what is a quasi-genocide in Gaza and increasingly in Lebanon. So it's not about they're not patriotic, it's just they don't agree with a particular policy. Now, going back to the original question, the last time I spoke with senior officers at the Cambridge Staff College, I asked them about this issue, and they said absolutely they wanted a professional, highly trained army. They did not want conscription. They thought British excellence comes by having a professional army that's well paid, the job is attractive, and in particular, the terrible accommodation issues that face lower ranks and married service people. That's a really major stumbling block to recruitment. And I think it's quite shocking that the officers in the British Army have fantastic accommodation. The lower ranks do not. It wouldn't pass muster in Civvy Street to put people in accommodation that some of our lower ranks have to live in military service. So we need to address those changes. If we make it a more attractive option, then we'll get the recruits, and then we'll have the highly excellent professional army that we need and deserve.
It's an excellent point. And Andrew, we've been covering today on GB News the Homes for Heroes scheme put forward by Sir Keir Starmer upon first casual analysis. Actually, it doesn't prioritise veterans. They will be behind the queue, behind asylum seekers even. So what does it say to people who might be thinking about joining the armed forces when they've finished their time? The governments, successive governments, again, has to be said, they seem to care about them. They're simply thrown out, you've served your time, thank you very much, often being crippled by homelessness, by addiction, by being tossed onto the scrap heap. So until we show that we care about our armed forces and our veterans, why should they care about us?
You're completely right. We have failed our veterans. There's so much we should have been doing in recent years to not only look after those that have served Queen and country, but also to encourage more younger people to actually want to go into the armed forces. We should have invested a lot more in things like the Air Training Corps and the Army Reserves. I think they should be supported at local level, particularly in schools and outside organisations. I think that we've done a lot to encourage young people to go to university, haven't we? A lot of that, but very little to encourage people to actually join the armed forces. And I think we need, Peter's right, the conditions are a big factor. People decide not to go to the armed forces because the conditions are so bad. We need to change the mindset of this. But to do so, it means spending a lot more money. And I'm afraid the peace dividend that we thought we had in the 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I'm afraid that was largely a mistake. We should have continued to invest in our armed forces, and we wouldn't be facing the problems we have today had we done so.
I think framing the problem in terms of defending king and country is the wrong approach, because that's a divisive issue. Andrew's right. It needs to be about defending our democratic way of life and our freedoms. If you sell the military on that basis, then I think more people will be inclined to join up.
Why do you think that's divisive? Is it because the monarchy in itself is divisive, and why would I be prepared to die for the king? Is that what you're saying?
Well, among young people, nearly 40% want to abolish the monarchy and replace it by a democratic elected head of state. So if you say the military is all about defending king and country, the royal family, a lot of people are going to be turned off. You don't want to turn them off. You want to make it as open and inclusive as possible, and that's why freedom and democracy has to be the rallying call.
I think that's a side. I think you're going a very wrong road there, Peter. Look, you have to swear oath of allegiance to the king to serve in the armed forces. It's something that people should be proud to do. It's an honour to serve king and country, as my father and my grandfathers did. To suggest that it's because they don't want to show loyalty to the king, I don't meet a single young person in my constituency that thinks that's an issue for them.
During the Second World War, people didn't sign up and enlist in their millions to defend the king. They signed up to defend our democracy against Nazi fascism. That's a very, very different issue, and we want to make the military
You're entitled to be a Republican,
but
that isn't the issue over this.
Yeah. I think you've both got excellent points. I think you're right. And I think that's a sad thing, but I do think Peter is right on the fact that a great many people now don't seem to be prepared to stand up for the monarchy. It's been taken apart by the establishment, by the media, by the BBC.
And by their own scandals.
Yeah, there is that. But look, great start to the show, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Andrew and Peter. Now stick with us, because coming up, the government could try to resolve the prisons crisis by introducing a points-based system that could lead to early releases thanks to good behaviour. Is that the answer? We'll discuss that next.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
You know, is the fact that electric blanket sales going up actually a good thing? This means that people are switched on to the problems that the winter might hold, that they might have some defence against it, or is it a real indictment of a Labour government that they aren't going to be able to, you know, support elderly people in their hour of need?
Good morning, by the way.
Morning.
I think the sale of electric blankets may well be because we've had this cold snap because of the Arctic weather coming in from the north. However, I think it's an absolute reality that, as your clip said, that over 800,000 elderly people who are eligible for the winter fuel allowance, who can get pension credits, are struggling to apply. And so what is absolutely essential at the moment is that all of those older people who are eligible for pension credits do apply and do get what's owed to them. The benefits are owed to them. And the average that people will get through pension credits is about £78 a week. So that's definitely going to make a massive difference to people who are really struggling.
What can organisations like yours do to encourage people to, I guess, educate themselves on technology and make that first step into the digital world, which is very intimidating at times?
Absolutely, and that's what we do at Good Things Foundation. So we're a national charity. We work all across the whole of the UK. And in your clip there, you had Links Digital, and they're a member of what we call the National Digital Inclusion Network, which is a network of local charities, small local community organisations, food banks, job centres, old people's clubs. So anyone, any organisation at that local level.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man himself, Nigel Farage. Now, Labour is looking set to introduce a points-based system which will reward prisoners for their good behaviour. The Justice Secretary will look at a Texas-style point system which offers offenders courses on reoffending, drugs or alcohol to reduce their sentences. And the news comes after 37 domestic abusers were wrongly released from prison yesterday under Labour's controversial prisoner release scheme following its action plan to reduce prison capacity. Well, I'm still joined in the studio here by my superstar panel. That's the Conservative MP for Romford, Andrew Rosendale, and, of course, Peter Tatchell, the human rights campaigner and activist. Gentlemen, thank you for your company as ever. Peter, I'm going to start with you. It may come as a surprise to you. I think this idea has merit. I've spent a lot of time in prisons, I hasten to say, for the right reasons. I go into prisons to talk to young men about what it means to be a man, to try and give them some insight to help to rehabilitate them. And I was always been struck by the idea that if you treat them with a bit of compassion, then you get something back. Give them a trade, they might have a chance on Civvy Street, whereas throwing them out, ill-prepared, often for a life of guaranteed homelessness, as we're seeing at the moment. That's why things are going so wrong. It's spectacularly failing. It might seem a bit touchy-feely, but do you think this kind of Texas-style point system has any merit?
We sort of already have it, because to get parole or to be released on licence, you have to have shown good behaviour. But I'd be all in favour of extending it. I'd even go further, though. I think all prisoners should be encouraged to work, to do productive labour, to produce economic wealth, and in return, as doing that, they should also get remission in their sentences together with their good behaviour. I have been to HMP Grendon, which is a model prison. It's the gold standard for prisons in the UK. Yep. It is all about rehabilitation. The prisoners actually run the prison, their own sections themselves. They have weekly counselling and psychological sessions.
What kind of offenders always? They're not like killers.
Yes, murderers, child molesters, the worst of the worst.
They're running the nicks.
Yeah. They're running their own little unit. Yeah.
Wow.
But it's all about self-responsibility, teaching them to take charge of their own lives, their own future, and chart a positive outcome. Now, the results are that HMP Grendon, the reoffending rate is half the national average. It's a huge success story, and it shows that rehabilitation works. And I just think that every prison in this country, of course, people need to be punished. There needs to be deterrence, but we need to give people the chance of rehabilitation and to acquire the skills they need so that when they're released, they can get jobs and be productive members of society.
Andrew Rosendale, Peter Tatchell's saying a lot of things there which no doubt would challenge your notion of law and order as someone from the Conservative right, being compassionate towards paedophiles, compassionate towards killers, might go get the instinct of a lot of our viewers. But is punishment just about retribution? Is it about punishment? Or is there some merit in a bit of humanity, equipping them to be better citizens if they're ever released?
Look, no one can disagree with the importance of rehabilitation and ensuring that when a prisoner goes into prison, that they leave prison perhaps as a better person, better equipped to go back into society and not to reoffend. So anything that can do what's happening at HMP Grendon, as Peter has outlined, that sounds excellent to me. However, punishment has to be there as well. You cannot just turn prisons into centres that people can go in and be given, lead a normal life in prison and then to go out, because then you're not discouraging people from committing those crimes. There's no deterrent. And I think that when it comes to sentencing, I've always tended to feel that we should have honest sentencing. Rather than actually let people out early, we should say, well, if you actually behave properly in prison and don't do bad things, then perhaps you'll go out when you're meant to leave rather than have it extended.
But
that's a better way of doing it.
But isn't part of the problem, though, is that successive governments, again, Conservatives, 14 years in power, and the Labour Party before that, haven't built enough nicks?
Well, that's all true.
So we're having to release people early because there's nowhere to store them.
We're facing this problem now because governments haven't planned. They haven't actually built enough prisons. the government are releasing people early, which I have grave concerns over. Now, 37 people have been released that shouldn't have been released.
Isn't that because the Tories didn't have enough capacity?
I'm not sure it was.
And Labour have inherited this mess.
All governments have allowed this to emerge as a serious problem, and we should have been building more prisons. If you don't build enough prisons, there can't be a deterrent because people are let out far too early than their sentence was given in the first place. So that has to change. And the last government did make mistakes on this, but the idea that the solution is to just let loads of prisoners out early, as you could see the other week, prisoners uncorking champagne and saying, well, they're always going to vote Labour now because of it. This is not the way. There has to be punishment. There has to be deterrent.
Peter, but there's got to be rehabilitation, because if they just go into prison and come out the unreformed characters they went in, society isn't the benefit. We lose. Rehabilitation works well in a small minority of prisons, but it's a very tiny minority. I've dealt with prisoners who have been desperate to learn skills, even to learn English language if they're foreign nationals, so they can be productive members of society.
They were better off to be deported back to their own country.
They couldn't get the classes that they wanted. And so, you know, if someone wants to get training and skills and they're not able to get it, like some of them are very poorly educated and they want to get their O-levels, A-levels, GCSEs and all the old qualifications.
Quick point, though, Peter.
They can't.
Quick point, though. A lot of these cons are going to see this go, all I've got to do is go to a little drug rehabilitation course, tick a few boxes, sit in the corner, pretend like I'm bored, and I'll be out early.
No,
Thank you very much. They could game the system.
No, the system has to be, there's proof with results. And it has to be not just ticking boxes and prisoners saying so. The other thing we have to remember is that about 2/3 of all prisoners have mental, drug and alcohol problems. And unless we deal with those, they're going to be in a cycle of prison, release, prison, release.
But even so, you don't want to make it an attractive option for people to commit crime and go to prison.
No, we're not.
And people actually to want to go there.
No.
You have to make it a punishment as well. Yes, rehabilitate, but also make sure that people know that they're not going to enjoy the experience of going to prison. Otherwise, it defeats the whole object.
And it's worth pointing out that 20% of the cons that have been released recently by the Labour Party are already back behind bars. Maybe a lot of them want to be back there. Maybe they get 3 meals a day. Maybe they're kept nice and warm. Maybe they miss their mates, and maybe that's a problem. We have institutional dependence.
Put them to work. You know, prisoners should help pay for the cost of their imprisonment. It shouldn't be the taxpayer. And that's why I'm saying prisoners in prisons should do productive work that earns money for the exchequer. They get a small share of it. And if they're doing their job well, it also counts towards good behaviour for potential early release.
Peter, Andrew, superb stuff. You're getting on far too well. Let's have an argument after the break. Next, we're off to the bastion of free speech and equality, Wales. It appears the government there have shelved shocking plans to force political parties to have 50% of candidates being women. It's all kicking off. They're not happy in the valleys.
Hello again and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Very wet overnight for some places with the risk of further flooding. Rain then clears to showers through Friday. Colder but brighter weather arrives from the north. We've already seen that for Scotland through the day, but across northern England, Northern Ireland, wet weather has been persisting all day. That then moves south overnight, merging with some heavy downpours across central England and Wales. And these are the areas that saw flooding earlier in the week, and so an amber warning in force because of the risk of 60 millimetres in just a few hours overnight. Could be some transport disruption first thing because of the effects of that rainfall. But by the morning rush hour, the heaviest downpours will actually be occurring across the south coast, parts of Hampshire into Sussex and Kent, clearing away gradually from the rest of the south. Brighter skies across Wales and northern England by this stage. Northern Ireland, Scotland seeing a mix of sunny spells and showers. And it's a cold start to the day in these areas with temperatures in some places down in the low single figures. The cold air because of northerly winds, and those northerlies extend countrywide through the morning, helping to push away the last of the rain and bringing brighter skies for many and drier weather finally across much of the country. Having said that, there will be further showers, these not as heavy or as prolonged as recent weather, but certainly a mixed afternoon to come. Sunny spells and showers and a cold wind with highs of just 15 Celsius in the south, 10 in the north. Now, Saturday starts off chilly, a touch of frost in places. Bright, though, across the south and the east, and we keep decent spells of sunshine into the afternoon. Western and northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England and Wales will see further showers. And by Sunday, after a dry start, unfortunately, we've got more wet and windy weather arriving from the west and the southwest.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man, Nigel Farage. You're going to love this story because the Welsh Government has U-turned on its plans to introduce legislation that would force parties to ensure at least 50% of its candidates are women during its elections. Now, quite rightly, the proposals were challenged on its legal basis, but Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice. Yes, they've got a Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice in Wales, Jane Hutt, said that there was now an opportunity for parties to cooperate on creating voluntary guidance to ensure a more representative Senedd in 2026.
Are Senedd members here interested in what this expanded Senedd looks like in 2026? Do you want to come back to a Senedd full of white men? No. So please take some time to look at what we can do.
And in a longer clip of that, the white men in the background start going a little bit nuts because they're basically being told you're not wanted in the Welsh Parliament. It's absolutely bonkers. Let's go through the legal framework of this now with the excellent barrister Stephen Barrett, great friend of the channel. Stephen, always an absolute pleasure. So on the basis of it, this is utterly bonkers, mandating that 50% of candidates must be women. And let's not even get into, like, are you actually identifying as a woman? But, Stephen, I love getting you on to talk me through the legal framework of this. Putting politics to one side, is this actually legal?
So let's go on a little tour of history, because I think it will illustrate a point I like to make about the law, which is that ultimately the laws are what the people want them to be. And it is not for the laws to tell the people what they should and shouldn't be. It's not for lawyers to dictate to people how they want their country run. In the old days, this was unlawful. And the Labour Party got taken to court in about 1996 because they were proposing all-female shortlists. And somebody quite rightly pointed out, well, that's discriminatory against men. It is, Martin, by the way. And in that clip, it's clearly discrimination against white men was raised. Yeah. We must not lose the ability to see this. And the court said, no, that's very wrong. So along comes a new law. The people use Parliament as they can to change the laws. And under the Equality Act 2010, this is permissible. It's something called Section 104, and you can have all-female shortlists. I mean, as a bisexual, Martin, I'm going to advocate strongly for all bisexual shortlists. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many of us there are. So I think I'd just be a shoo-in. But this is discrimination. It's what we call lawful or positive. Allegedly positive discrimination, because that's to give it an endorsement. I wonder, Martin, if your listeners and viewers know about the Lord of the Rings, because there's a quite powerful message in that, where if you try and use the weapon of your enemy, you will become your enemy, or you will be corrupted and you will be destroyed by your enemy. And all of this idea, it goes, so let's go back to 2010. It's now 2024. Are we free of discrimination then? Is everything great? Is everything absolutely honky-dory and lovely? But we have used the weapon of our enemy and allegedly to do good things. So no, I'm afraid I have to say that this is technically lawful. What they're proposing was far stronger. They're proposing that all the political parties effectively be bullied into doing this. When they brought it in, and this happens quite a lot with good intentions, they made a big song and dance about how this would be completely voluntary for political parties. Political parties won't have to do this. Nobody will make you do this. It's just the option of picking up the ring if you want to. And over time, we have slid down the inevitable slope. And I'm afraid, Martin, it would have been lawful. Whether to compel them or not is different, but it would have been lawful.
So it's bad law, but it is the law. And that's the big question, Stephen Barrett. Has anything good come out of the Equality Act? It seems it's just become this monstrous weapon to enforce discrimination against those who happen to be, white, men, heterosexual. It's actually been weaponised in a way that goes against the majority.
Well, they're the other group currently, the other group. So the group that has been othered, the group against which it is apparently, allegedly okay to discriminate. But that can change very quickly. It was Stalin's Russia that used identity politics, setting little groups against each other constantly as a means of control. That's what this is. It's a way of getting control. Does it address the substantive problem? I don't believe it does. And I came across something more interesting. You'll forgive me if I just look it up. In section 159, Martin, this is the ability of employers to discriminate in favour of people if they want to, if they think there's a problem. The wording, just because I am a nerd for words, the wording really struck me. And it's persons who share a protected characteristic, so that's me being bisexual, I've got that, suffer a disadvantage connected to the characteristic. What on earth does that mean? What do you mean a disadvantage? You're inherently saying that there's something wrong about me, that I'm one of those. He's one of those people. We had to give him a leg up because he just he needs it. He couldn't possibly get there on merit. It's just rude. It's actually very offensive. It's derogatory. As I say, it's the weapon of the enemy. It's the language of a discriminator. And I hate racism. I hate any identity politics, Martin, because fundamentally, it's not just morally wrong and evil, it's irrational. It is utterly irrational to look at my skin tone and say that I'm clever or thick. It's just irrational to take that position on any human being, to say everyone who wears blue shoes is a genius, everyone with blonde hair is evil. This is just nonsense. It's nonsense on stilts. But we have written it into our law. That is your choice. You have irrational laws. You asked if anything good has come of the Equality Act. Lots of fighting, Martin. And lots more fighting will come of this.
But luckily, lots of magnificent monologues from people like yourself. Stephen Barrett, marvellous. Thank you very, very much for summing that up and making it so entertaining, and even getting a bit of J.R. Tolkien in there to boot. Now, thank you, Stephen. And joining me back in the studio, of course, my superstar panel, Conservative MP for Romford, Andrew Rosendale, and Peter Tatchell, the human rights campaigner and activist. Now, Andrew, I want to start with you this time. So what do you make of the fact that we have legislation now which basically makes it OK to discriminate against white men?
It's discrimination. It's wrong. This Equalities Act needs to go, and I hope that will be dumped once we have a new government in a few years' time, because it's done a huge amount of damage, terribly divisive.
You could have dumped it when you were in power.
Look, the last government failed on a whole range of things. In future, we've got to get these things right. The Equalities Act is divisive. It divides people up. We're all individuals. We're all different in lots of ways. There are no two people alike. And I like the fact that in this country, traditionally, people get to where they are because they're on merit. We had Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister. She was a woman, right? She got there not because she was a woman, because she was a strong leader with a clear purpose, and people voted her in. So I don't believe we should discriminate. I don't believe in identity politics. I don't believe in any of this. I think everybody should be able to get to where they want to be because they deserve it, because they worked for it, and they're purely there on their merit.
Peter, is it fair to say that laws like this have made monsters of the so-called social justice warriors? They're the racists now. They're the sexists. They think they're the goodies. They're actually the baddies.
That's a misinterpretation. The Equality Act is everyone's protection. It guarantees
Apart from the straight white men.
No, it guarantees equal treatment and protection against discrimination for everyone. For elderly people, white people, people with whatever they are, minorities or majorities, under that law, we are all equal before the law.
But white people don't have protected characteristics. Well, that's what Stephen Barrett has pointed out. They've invented a hierarchy.
Yeah, no, the purpose of the equality law is to right historic injustices and wrongs. So, for example, for centuries, women have been excluded. Women have been underrepresented. This proposal by the Welsh Government, whether you agree with a particular plan, its purpose is to try and put that right, to ensure that women have an equal place in the Welsh Parliament. And I think that's a good thing, because women are historically underrepresented in politics, and
but they're perfectly able to put themselves forward as a candidate. No one's stopping them being a candidate.
Well, I'm afraid to say that the bias of our political system and of political parties has been to favour men.
Oh,
now, I'm all in favour of men being in Parliament. I stood myself to be in Parliament, and I'm a man. But I think it's right that we try and give an uplift to women so that we have a representative Parliament. Parliament should reflect the society it represents and legislate.
Where then to so-called minorities you need to give an uplift to? You're going to divide everybody up. And in the end, good people that could be there on merit can't be there because their place is being taken by someone else because they tick a certain box.
Too many white guys.
Absolutely wrong.
You should only be able to get there on merit. Just because you're of a certain race or sexuality or gender, that should not give you a free pass. You have to get there on merit as well.
But you can still overtake someone that could have been there because they don't tick the box that you've created.
And let's face it, identity politics is an invented hierarchy. It's created this oppression Olympics. It gives favour to those who somebody decided in 2010 with the Equality Act is oppressed, and it's given the oppressor rights, thank you very much, to people like us. White guys, I've never oppressed anybody in my life. Why should I be prevented from standing for Parliament because I don't tick a box?
Well, you wouldn't be prevented.
Well, I would be if there are enough men on the list already, if this was the law.
According to the Welsh system proposed, 50% representation would be male. So men would not be excluded. But you'd have your right. And the Equality Act does not privilege minorities.
So what happens if, as is presumably why we've got this legislation, not enough women are coming forward when it's a voluntary choice? What do we march them at gunpoint to go and stand as candidates?
Of course not. But I think it's good to have political parties required to ensure that there is greater balance between men and women.
So you would make it, you would enforce it, you would force political parties to have a quota of women and other types of minorities and other types of people. Where would this end?
No, I'm not saying
Where would it end?
I'm not saying, but I think in terms of gender balance, I mean, women are half of our society.
But would you have gender balance in all other walks of life as well, or is it only MPs?
Well, ideally, it'd be good to have more women FTSE 100 CEOs. That would be great.
What about
They're
the bad jobs?
massively underrepresented.
What about the bad jobs? It's always the great jobs that we want more. What about bricklayers?
Well, they're all
men, sewage workers.
If you look at cleaners and other domestic workers, they're overwhelmingly women, overwhelmingly low paid. So I think they deserve a better deal.
OK, let's call time on this debate about equality. Great stuff, gentlemen. Now, in a moment, we'll discuss something that the man who normally presents this show feels very, very strongly about. And that is MPs are under increasing risk due to the Middle East conflict. Could they be in peril? We'll discuss that next with Andrew and Peter.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Richard, the King will probably fly there, I would imagine, with the Queen. You can guarantee they'll have to make a point about offsetting their carbon just to keep that lot happy. They won't use the walkabout term because they'll have to keep the Aboriginal community happy over there. Obviously, they'll be fine that the Queen's face has now been taken off banknotes over there, replaced, I believe, by a member of the Aboriginal community, naturally. You've got all of these tick boxes that the King and the royal family have to do, instead of just maybe, I don't know, leading, being there, being present. Why do they keep bowing down to this stuff?
Well, firstly, as I say, I mean, if you look at the Commonwealth, there are 56 countries. Now, I think that's an enormously important institution, and we benefit in all sorts of ways, as do the other countries who are members of it. Now, if you don't take account, with times changing, by the way, of course, as they did during Queen Elizabeth's reign, if you don't take account of various sensitivities, especially certain pressure groups, I'm not suggesting that we write off our history as being something that's dreadful. There are ups and downs and pluses and minuses, we all know that. But the point is to be sensitive to other cultures, and that is absolutely pivotal.
What we're seeing in the UK, a lot of these same issues do crop up in Australia, especially with freedom of speech and saying the wrong thing, getting cancelled. I've met with so many people who have personally, like, they've been deplatformed, lost their jobs just for having an opinion, just for potentially saying the wrong thing, and then losing their livelihood as a result. So with Australia, I think particularly this is the trend that we saw from 2020 with the lockdowns, especially in Melbourne, some of the harshest lockdown restrictions in the world. Now, Australia is known as being a country of freedom and liberty. So then I think for many Australians, it was a huge turning point, a big wake-up call.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, standing in for the big man, Nigel Farage. Now, a story which the man who usually presents this show feels very, very strongly about. Counter-terrorism experts have warned that the threat to MPs on the basis of their views on the war in Gaza is soaring. And police have said that the spreading conflict, which is intensifying, of course, in Lebanon, could become a motivating factor for terror attacks and plots. Police pointed to the Hartlepool terror attack last year where jihadist Ahmed Alid murdered 70-year-old grandfather Terence Carney and told police it was revenge for Israel killing innocent people and children in airstrikes on Gaza. Now, this following, of course, the attacks on MP Sir David Amess. In fact, he was murdered just 2 years before when he was stabbed to death by an ISIS supporter. Now, we've got a quick clip here to show, because there is actually, at present, a protest going on right outside the studio here at Whitehall around the Lebanon protest. I think we've got some footage of that now we can show. So this is as we speak now outside. So there's a sizable protest again. And I've got to say, I walk through these things almost weekly. They've been going on now all the way through since October 7th. I've had stuff thrown at me. I've had eggs thrown at me. I tried to get the police. I begged the police to take down that projector, putting its disgusting image onto the Houses of Parliament there, onto Big Ben. But enough about me. Joining me now is my panel. And it's the Conservative MP for Romford, Andrew Rosendale, and Peter Tatchell, of course, the human rights campaigner and activist. Back to the point in question. I'll start with you, Andrew. The threat to MPs is clearly growing. Now, we've seen David Amess murdered, Mike Freer, of course, Finchley, MP, his arson attack on his office at the last general election. He stood down as a candidate. Labour Party MPs have had it too. Vicky Foxcroft, Lewisham North. Sir Keir Starmer was harangued off a train in Glasgow. Rachel Reeves on the general election campaign. Apolitically, it seems to be a growing phenomenon, and the people perpetrating this seem to be the new intolerant pro-Palestine protesters. Is this a growing threat?
So it's 3 years since Sir David was murdered, and we still live with the horror of that moment. All of us that get elected are always potentially under threat from someone. We all have people in our constituencies who blame us for everything and come to our surgeries or come to our offices and say and do things which are completely inappropriate and sometimes threatening. But what happened to David and Joe Cox before him was absolutely horrific. I fear, however, that not enough is done to protect parliamentarians, but also the anger in society, a lot of it misplaced, I have to say, seems to generate hatred towards elected politicians. There's no easy answer to this, but I do believe that the authorities in this country need to take it much more seriously, how elected politicians and public figures generally are not protected and are not safe from carrying out their elected duties.
Peter Tatchell, it cannot be ignored that this menace, this growing menace, has definitely increased since October the 7th. There seems to be a huge intolerance among the pro-Palestine protesters. It's a cause I know you sympathise with. I'm hoping you're going to call out this mob now and say, just calm down, lads.
Well, first let me say, when I stood for Parliament in Bermondsey in 1983, in the run-up to that election, I was violently assaulted 151 times.
And that's disgusting.
And I had 2 attempts to run me down in cars. I had a bullet through the front door, arson attacks upon my flat as well. So I know firsthand the terror that many MPs are feeling. I totally agree that people have a right to protest, but not to the point of violence and threats and aggravated harassment. There has to be a legitimate challenge, that's part of politics, but not the extreme kind of behaviour of a minority. And it is a very small minority. Most of the people on the Palestine protests and other protests are well behaved. They are respectful of their critics and their opponents, but they're making a point. That's valid in a democracy.
OK, Peter Tatchell, excellent. I'd like to bring at this point a fitting moment to bring in Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Of course, State of the Nation is next. I know this is something that's impacted you. I've seen you harangue through the streets. The mob even visited your home and harassed your children. What's your take? Do you think this is the growing menace?
Well, I agree so much with Peter that people have a right to protest. Even outside my home, they have a right to protest as long as it's peaceful. I don't want them to. It's not nice to have people outside your house shouting at you, but as long as they're peaceful, it is legal, and so it should be. And there have always been risks. I think, again, Peter reminds us, it wasn't always safe in the 80s. Think of Ian Gow, Erin Neve in the late 70s. There has been a long-standing risk to public figures, and it's really, really important that we remain an open democratic society where our voters can come and talk to us. We mustn't all be hidden away.
Here. So, Sir Jacob, your show is next. What's on your menu, sir?
Well, I'm trying to say we're back to Donergate because it's the gift that keeps on giving, at least to Sir Keir Starmer, who gets more and more gifts than anybody. So we're now going to discuss Lord Ali himself. What's he trying to get out of this? Because he's given to so many different people. We discovered tonight Wes Streeting had a party in this flat that Lord Ali owns but never seems to use because it's constantly hosting various Labour Party politicians. What's he trying to do? Because, as I said last night, where there's a tip, there's a tap.
And my favourite line today was the £80 million mansion has now been called Ali's Palace.
Oh, Ali Palace, very good
stuff. Peter, thank you very much to you as well. Andrew Rosendale, thank you so much for your company. Great show. Now, I'm going to be back tomorrow, 3 till 6 p.m. on my show. Up next, of course, is Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg with State of the Nation. Thanks for joining us. Have a fantastic evening. Now, here's your weather with Aidan McGibbon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Very wet overnight for some places with the risk of further flooding. Rain then clears to showers through Friday. Colder but brighter weather arrives from the north. We've already seen that for Scotland through the day, but across northern England, Northern Ireland, wet weather has been persisting all day. That then moves south overnight, merging with some heavy downpours across central England and Wales. And these are the areas that saw flooding earlier in the week, and so an amber warning in force because of the risk of 60 millimetres in just a few hours overnight. Could be some transport disruption first thing because of the effects of that rainfall. But by the morning rush hour, the heaviest downpours will actually be occurring across the south coast, parts of Hampshire into Sussex and Kent. clearing away gradually from the rest of the south. Brighter skies across Wales and northern England by this stage. Northern Ireland and Scotland seeing a mix of sunny spells and showers, and it's a cold start to the day in these areas, with temperatures in some places down in the low single figures. The cold air because of northerly winds, and those northerlies extend countrywide through the morning, helping to push away the last of the rain and bringing brighter skies for many and drier weather finally across much of the country. Having said that, there will be further showers, these not as heavy or as prolonged as recent weather, but certainly a mixed afternoon to come. Sunny spells and showers and a cold wind with highs of just 15 Celsius in the south, 10 in the north. Now, Saturday starts off chilly, a touch of frost in places. Bright, though, across the south and the east, and we keep decent spells of sunshine into the afternoon. Western and northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England and Wales will see further showers. And by Sunday, after a dry start, unfortunately, we've got more wet and windy weather arriving from the west and the southwest.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be the next Great British Giveaway winner with a